Vande Mataram children, I Mr. Basavaraj Nipani welcome you all to Sir Kalam Tutorial YouTube education channel. Dear guys, as you all know, in my previous video class in part 3, we have discussed why do we need constitution. Second main point of the lesson, constitutional design. In today's class, we shall start one more important topic of this lesson, that is making of the Indian Constitution. So dear children, in today's class we shall discuss how Indian Constitution has been drawn up and what are the major steps taken during the making of Indian Constitution that can be studied in today's class. So let us go forward. Dear children, as you all know, in previous class we have discussed about how South African Constitution has written and what are the measures taken by the leaders of South Africa, both leaders from white minority as well as black minority, and what are the difficulties faced by South African leaders while making constitution for their country. So in today's class, let us discuss what are the major steps taken towards making up Indian Constitution and what are the major challenges faced by Indian leaders while making Indian Constitution. Let us start. Like South Africa, India's constitution was also drawn up under very difficult circumstances. So means when Indian leaders were trying to write constitution for our country, even our leaders also faced a lot of difficulties and challenges, and it was also under very difficult circumstances. The making of the constitution for a huge and diverse country like India was not an easy affair. Why Indian leaders face a lot of challenges and obstacles while making Indian Constitution? Because as you all know, India was a vast country. It was a diverse country in which there were major communities, religions, people belonging to different caste, creed, speaking different languages, lived in different regions. So there were a lot of social diversities and there were a lot of religious diversities, economical diversities, political diversities, and there were other kinds of diversities in which people had different interests, in which people had different traditions and followed different customs. So it was not an easy affair to write and draw up a constitution for the people of the country who had different interests. At the time, the people of India were emerging from the status of subjects to that of citizens. Before 1947, before the constitution was made, all the citizens of the country were under the rule of different rulers such as kings. At the same time, they were under the control of British people. They were under the clutches of British. So they were subject to the rulers. But immediately after the independence, during the making of Indian Constitution, the people of our country were transforming themselves to from subject to citizens, and the country was born through a partition on the basis of religious differences. So this was the major challenge while making the Indian Constitution. So country was born through partition. Partition means, as you all know, there are different kinds of religions in our country, such as Hindu religion, Islam religion, Buddhism, Jainism, Christian religion. All such religions can be seen in our country. So there was a fight between Hindu religion and Muslim religion. So people were trying to separate themselves. So as you all know, Pakistan is separated from India today. Before, Pakistan was also a part and parcel of our country. But during 1947, immediately after the independence, some of the leaders of Pakistan, such as Abdul Kalam Azad and many of his followers, they were not ready to include into India's union. They were demanding for separate state, they were demanding for separate nation. So in this way, people had lot of confusions, people had lot of problems, and they were in dilemma whether they should include into Pakistan union or Indian union. So in this regard, there were a lot of violence, there were a lot of fights between people and different religions. So many of the people were being killed from both the groups. So in this way, there was a partition, there was a segregation of Pakistan and India. This was a traumatic experience for the people of India and Pakistan. So it was one of the painful experience for the people who belong to India and Pakistan. At least 10 lakh people were killed on the both sides of the border in partition related violence. So here many of the leaders of Pakistan forced many Indian Muslims and many other Indian people to include into Pakistan Union, and many of the Indians ignored, they rejected the offer of Pakistan. In this regard, there were a lot of violence and fights in which lakhs and lakhs of people were being killed from both the sides. There was another problem. This was the first main problem, this was the first major challenge while making Indian constitution. And another major problem was the British had left it to the rulers of the princely states to decide whether they wanted to merge with India or with Pakistan or remain independent. And another major problem which was created by British people is that before 1947, where British people were ruling India, British people were ruling India through different princely states in which there were a lot of kings ruling different regions such as Hyderabad province, Madras province, Bombay province, Mysore province. So there were a lot of provinces. Majorly there were 17 provinces in which there were prince, and all those princely states got their own rights to decide whether they should include into Pakistan Union or Indian Union or they should be separate. That right was given by British people to all these kinds of princely states. So this liberty which was given by the British people to princely states created a huge problem. Many decided to include into Indian Union and many decided to include into Pakistan Union, and Pakistan Union and leaders of Pakistan were trying to force some of the other regions and provinces to include into Pakistan, and such as Kashmir decided to remain separate as a separate union or as a separate state. So in this way this created a big problem during the making of Indian constitution. And the merger of these princely states was a difficult and uncertain task, and it was a very big task, it was an uncertain task. When the constitution was being written, the future of the country did not look as secure as it does today. So when constitution was written in the year it started, the making of the Indian constitution started by the leaders of a country immediately after the independence, and before the independence only there were a lot of plans made that how they should have the constitution, what kind of constitution should be given to the independent country. That was already done before independence only, and the work was in progress, and many of the leaders such as Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. Babu Rajendra Prasad and many other leaders, they all started writing the constitution for country. And during the writing of the constitution, the future of the country was not like this, because there were a lot of problems and a lot of challenges. But present situation is totally different. The makers of the constitution had anxieties about the present and the future of the country. So because of this reason, our leaders of constitution, the makers of Indian constitution, took some major steps, took some cautious steps to write the Indian constitution which should help the people of present situation, future situation also. So they kept all such kinds of challenges of the future in mind, and they took some cautious efforts and they wrote constitution for our country. Much of this consensus had evolved during the freedom struggle, and many other major steps of Indian constitution were taken during the freedom struggle of our country. Our national movement was not merely a struggle against foreign rule. As you all know, Indian people struggled very hard to get independence, and we call it as freedom struggle. It was not merely a struggle against British rule, it was also a struggle against many of the challenges. It was also a struggle to regenerate our country, regenerate in the sense to transform our country into a new nation, because our people had no experience of new nation. Our people had no idea of democratic nation because almost 300 years they were under the clutches of all these kinds of rulers such as British rulers, Mughals, Delhi Sultanates and many other kingdoms. So our people had no idea what was the liberty, what is a democratic government and what is the idea of democracy. So there was a need of regeneration of the country, there was a need of transformation of the country into a new nation. So even this also created a big problem. So because our leaders had to inculcate the feeling of oneness and the feeling of nationality in the heart of the citizens, that was the major challenge before our leaders. There were sharp differences of opinion within the freedom struggle about the path India should take after the independence. And during the Indian freedom struggle, there were different political parties, and the major party was INC, Indian National Congress. And there were different groups, there were different leaders who were trying to struggle against British, and they had different opinions and they had different interest, and they had to be collective. But unfortunately, different people had different interests, they had different ideologies, they had different philosophies, they had different interests, and they had different opinions. How should India transform after the independence? What kind of nation should be built by the citizens of the country? In this regard, there were different ideas, so they were not matching to each other. So even this was also a major problem. As you all know, Gandhiji had a different opinion, Nehru had a different opinion, Ambedkar had a different opinion, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had a different opinion. So each and every single leader has his or her opinions, and there were different political parties which also had different kinds of interest and opinions to build a new nation. Even these kinds of different interests and opinions also created a big problem, and there was a task in front of the leaders of the Indian Constitution to recollect all these opinions and to have a collective opinion and build a new nation and to give a wonderful constitution which suits for all the different kinds of groups in the country. Such differences exist even today. We cannot say that there are no differences in present day. Even today also we can see such differences which are existing today, yet some basic ideas that had come to be accepted by almost everyone. But our Indian constitution makers were very wise, keeping all these kinds of differences, keeping all these kinds of interest and all the diversities in mind. They wrote a constitution which accepted by everyone in the country. So as far back as in 1928, Motilal Nehru and 8 other Congress leaders drafted a constitution for India. Before 1947, before the independence of our country, in the year 1988 only, the father of Jawaharlal Nehru, that is Motilal Nehru and other 8 leaders from Indian National Congress Party, drafted a constitution for our country in the year 1928. And in the year 1931, the resolution at the Karachi session, there was a big meeting taken place in Karachi. Presently Karachi is in Pakistan. There was a debate, there was a discussion, a huge meeting was taken place in which there were a lot of debates and discussions about the constitution of future India. These two incidents had their impact on the Indian constitution. Karachi session of the Indian National Congress dwelt on how independent India's constitution should look like. Both these documents were committed to inclusion of universal adult franchise. So during all these meetings, during all these events, there was one common policy which was agreed upon by all the leaders of the country, that is adopting universal adult franchise. Universal adult franchise means all the adult citizens must have a right to vote, one person, one vote and one value, as we have discussed in the previous class. That is right to freedom and right to equality, and to protecting the rights of the minorities in the constitution of the independent India. And also they had one more provision in the Indian constitution of protecting the rights of minorities, because India was full of poor people, India was full of rich people at the time. Many people were poor, many people were rich, and many people had different communities, caste and creeds. So there were a lot of minority groups. See here, not only majority groups should enjoy the privileges, at the same time minority groups should also enjoy the privileges. Keeping all these things in mind, Indian leaders drawn up a new constitution for country. Thus some basic values were accepted by all the leaders much before the Constitution Assembly. And after all these meetings, the Constitution Assembly was made. Before the Constitution Assembly was made, these all kinds of common factors were agreed upon by all the leaders who involved in making of the Indian Constitution. Then afterwards, Constituent Assembly was made and it was met to deliberate on the Constitution. Familiarly with the political institutions of the colonial rule also helped develop an agreement over the institutional design. And even we can find some of the institutional design in our Indian Constitution which were taken by the help of the rule of the colonies. Means there was a rule of colony, means there was colonial rule which was established by British people. There were some good laws, there were some good policies which were followed by British people. Here British people ruled us, it doesn't mean we are not supposed to accept the good policies. So Indian leaders studied some good policies of the colonial rule, and some of the basic and fundamental policies of colonial rule were also taken by Indian leaders. They were also considered by Indian leaders. The British rule had given voting rights only to a few. On that basis, the British had introduced a very weak legislature. Elections were held in 1937. So before, only British people also had given the provisions to Indian citizens to conduct elections, and those elections were held in the year 1937, but that was considered as a weak legislature because only voting right was given to few people, not for all the adult citizens. To provincial legislatures, means provincial states, and ministries all over the British India. British India means the India which was under the control of British people is called British India. Even during that time also elections were held for the provincial states, but there was an idea of vote, and the voting right was given to people, but only for few people, not for all the other citizens, and that was not fully called democratic. But the experience gained by Indians in the working of the legislative institutions proved to be very useful for the country in the setting up its own institution. But that was the idea which was introduced by British people in British India that helped our Indian leaders who were writing the constitution to establish and to follow the idea of universal adult franchise and to introduce institutional design into Indian constitution. So that gave a new experience for Indian leaders. So working in them, that is why the Indian constitution adopted many institutional details and procedures from colonial law like the Government of India Act 1935. So because of this reason I am telling you that colonial rule also helped Indian leaders to adopt some major policies and institutional design in our Indian constitution. And majorly the act was passed, India Act was passed by British people in the year 1935, which had some good policies regarding the administration, regarding the function of the government. So some of the important policies and laws were lent from the India Act which was passed in the year 1935 by British people. So years of thinking and deliberation, and after lot of thinking which took years and years, almost it took 3 years of thinking and deliberation on the framework of the constitution had another benefit. And the makers of the Indian constitution spent their own time. They traveled to many countries, they discussed and they had debates, and they visited many countries and collected lot of information about the constitutions of other country, and the long years of discussion gave a fruitful experience for the leaders of Indian constitution. Our leaders gained the confidence to learn from other countries, but on our own terms. Many of our leaders were inspired by the ideas of French Revolution, and Even the constitution of France and the experience of French Revolution also gave some fruitful ideas and experience for our leaders how to make a constitution for future India. The practice of parliamentary democracy in Britain and in the Bill of Rights in the US. So Indian constitution is also inspired by Bill of Rights in the United States of America and also the parliamentary democracy of British and the French Revolution. All these three major constitutional designs were inspired by Indian leaders, and many of wonderful policies of all those constitutions were adopted by Indian leaders. And also the socialist revolution in Russia, means the Russian revolution, also inspired many Indians to think of shaping a system based on social and economical equality. So as you all know, all these revolutions such as American Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, all such revolutions were taken place because of the social diversities existing in those countries and how the leaders of all those countries dealt with all such differences. That experience gained by Indian leaders to set up a new constitution for having social diversities in our country. Yet they were not simply imparting what others had done. So simply our Indian leaders were not lending the points from all those constitutions. They lent some points from those constitutions and they set up all those points to our country on the basis of the differences existing in our country. And they also had the thought that those all kinds of policies must help the regional diversities, the social diversities, the religious diversities, the communal diversities existing in our country. At each step, they were questioning whether these things suited our country. All these factors contributed to the making of Indian Constitution. While writing the Constitution for our country, in each and every single step, our Indian leaders, our constitution makers took some major steps and they had checks and balances and they had questions and debates and discussions, and very cautiously they thought whether this policy, whether this point would suit our country or what. In this way, Indian Constitution was made. This is a small history and background of making up Indian Constitution. In the next class, we shall discuss about one more important point, that is Constituent Assembly. How exactly Indian Constitution was drawn up can be discussed in my next class. Till then, take care. Goodbye.